Chapter 2. I was, like most children in central Hanyam, raised to believe that Mynah Smith was a god. They went as far as to explain to me that his descendants carry on his divinity today. I was always fond of Mynah, the namesake of my formerly beloved birds. As a historical figure, and through his life's work. But I never bought every page of the official story. Additionally, this forced reality clashed with the militant skepticism my father had simultaneously injected me with for the sake of my survival. As of writing this, it has been 497 years since the first Mynah arrived alongside the remainder of humanity. Bringing humans from the old world to Hanyam was a great accomplishment. But my perception of him has still been just that of an extraordinary mortal. I would argue that he could not be God, as not only did he eventually die just like the rest of us, but he was merely responsible for the creation of some aspects of Hanyam. He deserves the credit for birds, dogs, and humans, and all they contribute. But the Gisharan, the Felabrano people, have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Prior to the introduction of my race, they had their own languages, cultures, and ways of life. Now we all just speak human and survive like humans, with only the most radical of natives longing for anything else. Hanyam's other ancient species have evolved to be just as enthralling without the influence of humanity, from the treasured gilded boar to the endlessly useful galalapos. In addition to his religious beliefs, my father also made sure to instill in me a crude sense of patriotism for the Indigalo Federation. The year I was born, he retired from his role as the director of Federation intelligence to raise his children. But that did not stop him from continuing to do them great service. My siblings and I were, in part, developed by him as a sort of gift to the Federation itself. He trained us from birth to be a new sort of knight, skilled in all sorts of combat and other trades, with the hope that we would eventually rise to prominent roles in the Federation and aid it in its conquest for expansion. This conquest is quite new to us all. For centuries, Hanyam had strict and permanent borders, but it seems as though the new leadership has become confident enough to shake things up a bit. On some level, we knights seem to have been a success. There was one comical obstacle in my father's way, however. Nobody could love a man like that. He was harsh, frightening, and cold. Before us, his work had been every moment of his life. And then our training took its place. No time or capacity for a woman. Tragically, this was easily circumvented. Inspired by the Mynahs themselves, he employed the assistance of Smithian concubines for conception. Not having a mother has, in all honesty, had little effect on me. If she had been allowed to stick around, I am certain that father's ways would have allowed me no time for her regardless. So it may even be better this way. Due to our distinct features, it is clear that my siblings are really only half-siblings, meaning he had to go through at least 4 different concubines to produce his little squadron. I find that thought much stranger than my lack of a mother. My sister, Autumn, would often joke about what may have become of them. She always had a sick sense of humor.
I hope my mom got a quick death and yours got a slow one,
she once remarked after losing a duel to me.
I am not sure what happened to them, but I suspect they each met the same fate,
I responded, exhausted.
Man, you even talk like a book. You're supposed to have a snarky remark to get me back with, moron,
she complained. After a moment of thought, I returned with,
I bet they had to kill her fast to stomp out all those defective genes she passed on to you.
She was not impressed by this, but that did not matter to me since I always won. Words have no use against an enemy that can be defeated by more classical means, especially not quippy, irritating words. The importance of separating us from our parents is most apparent in my youngest brother, Nicholas. I was certainly the closest to Nick growing up. Despite our upbringing, he always had something nice to say, especially in terms of advice. It was this that led me to confide in him, and he would always try to balance it out by telling me everything he could. Sadly for him, I had many more secrets. One night, after I told him something personal and dangerous, he chose to confide his greatest secret in me.
I think I remember her, Zed,
he told me.
Who?
I questioned. After a brief hesitation, he answered.
My mother.
This shocked me, as even though I had been 6 years old at the time of his birth, I had never even caught so much as a glimpse of any potential mother of his. I even remember the day of his birth, though I was obviously not allowed to be present for it.
What do you remember about her?
I hastily inquired.
How is it possible?
I think he let her hold me,
he answered, as though he were confessing to a terrible crime.
I remember remembering it, and then I suppose I remember remembering that.
What was it like?
I asked, purely out of curiosity.
It felt safe.
Huh.
It felt like what I think this castle is supposed to feel like. It felt like a home where nothing could go wrong. There was no training or assignment, only the warm embrace of love. She was gentle and soft. Her skin was dark, her hair was long. She had everything he didn't. I think about her all the time. I think about her so much that I'm scared I'll start to misremember what it was like.
I felt so terrible for him. I was lucky not to have such a memory, and I prayed he would forget it, so he could feel better. He deserved that much. It was no secret that Nick was my favorite, as we eventually grew to be divided into consistent pairs for every training activity that required a partner. Autumn and my other brother, Charles Jr., or Chuck as we call him, would always beg to be on my team, but I would rather align with Nick every time. Maybe it was in part due to pity. As he was so young, it made every competition unfair. But I really did work better with him than anyone else. He made up for what I lacked in terms of perspective, and I had enough strength and skill to carry us to victory in other regards, most of the time. This paid off a couple of times. I distinctly remember around the time Nick's training had begun, when my father summoned us all to the primary practice room on the second level of the castle. Usually, We would be told what sort of training was planned during the morning, so we could prepare accordingly. But this time, it was a sadistic kind of surprise.
Knights, attention!
Commanded my father.
Yes, Director
Director
Aurum,
sir.
We barked back. This always made him smile. He had one of those terrible smiles that would wrinkle his face up in a twisted mess. Even his immense wealth could not manage to keep his teeth any color other than yellow.
Today is a very special day,
He explained.
Today we welcome Nick to our first group activity as a complete family.
Nick nodded respectfully, but I had begun to grow uneasy.
After 2 years of tiresome free-for-alls between you three, we finally have ourselves some nice even numbers.
He spewed, clasping his hands together with excitement at the prospect. I felt a strange urge to object, something I had never even considered before.
Same rules as duels, except now you will each select a partner.
I felt Autumn and Chuck's eyes on me, but I did not dare look back. Instead, my eyes tightened on the man in front of me.
He is 8.
I think that may have been the first time Charles Aurum was surprised by anything. His expression did not change at all, and he showed no sign of any meaningful emotion. He simply paused. This man had spent his life calculating everything before it happened. So 3 unexpected words were enough to freeze him entirely. This pleased me, even if just for a moment.
Zed Aurum, are you objecting to something?
The statue asked. It could be argued I should have stopped there. I did not.
Chuck did not have his first duel until age 10, sir,
I said, with a calm voice, yet angry eyes.
I do not think Nicholas is ready.
That sickening smile returned to his face, as if to announce the arrival of an idea.
This activity is not called a duel. It's a partner duel. If you object so strongly to hurting him, then I suppose it's only fair that the 2 of you are a team.
A wave of relief washed over me. It seemed then that my punishment just so happened to be what I had already planned on.
One more thing, Zed,
he continued. Just then, perfectly timed with the end of his sentence, he swung a cheap uppercut directly into the side of my jaw, sending me off the ground and then right back down to it. That man was much stronger than he looked. I felt the force distribute across my bones and into everything from pressure in my eye to bleeding in my mouth. The blow had been so perfectly unexpected as to wind me entirely. My brain may have come into contact with my skull, as I felt my consciousness become unreliable. Dizziness infiltrated my vision and confusion into my mind. The world spun around me, and I lacked the energy to keep up with it.
if you ever talk back to me again, I will kill you,
he responded plainly.
I do not care how many resources or hours I may have poured into your subpar development. You are a product. You are a soldier. You are an Indigalo knight. The will of the Indigalo Federation is the only will you may be concerned about. Do you understand?
Blood sputtered from my mouth as I pulled myself up into a weak stance, wobbly and trembling with a cacophony of pain and fear. I could see my siblings glaring at me with only their eyes, not daring to move their bodies. Varying levels of concern emanated from each of them. But I could tell Nicholas was genuinely worried for me, rather than just for himself.
Yes, sir.
I spat out, barely able to make a coherent noise, as liquid poured out from my tongue like vibrant red dye on the white canvas of my teeth.
No weapons or armor. The fight begins in 30 seconds.
Father announced with a tone of clearly directed disappointment.
Begin preparations.
As Autumn and Chuck scurried over to a corner to begin discussing strategy, Nick rushed to my side. He grabbed my nearly limp arm and looked up at me. He saw one of me while I saw 3 of him.
It's going to be all right, Zed.
He assured me as he gripped my thumb in his hand.
Take a deep breath and hold it.
Barely able to grip reality, I complied. The intake of air tasted like blood, as did everything else. In spite of the iron-like taste, I felt somewhat refreshed.
Exhale.
I did, and for a moment, I had tricked myself into feeling normal. Somehow, just a bit of air and care had quelled my possible concussion and shock. Of course, it crept back, but we repeated a couple of times to the point that I could get a grip of my surroundings. I believed him. It was going to be all right.
Begin,
announced my father, allowing the real situation to set in. Blurs of indigo-colored jumpsuits, Autumn's dark hair, and Chuck's stupid shades rushed toward me like ghosts. The stakes were higher than usual, as any damage I sustained would worsen whatever condition my father had inflicted upon me. And I obviously could not let them hurt Nick. A losing punishment also came to sound even less appealing in a moment like that.
Behind,
I commanded weakly, with no objection from Nicholas. Just as they approached me, I realized I had acquired a major advantage, in that I appeared quite weak. They would undoubtedly underestimate me, and let their guard down for the sake of a quick and easy offensive. So I did the only logical thing. Fully utilizing my ambidextrous nature, and all the strength remaining in my body, I swung 2 fair punches into their noses. No cheap shot was required to put them down. I vaguely remember the sound of glass cracking before their bodies collapsed to the ground, which was enough to make me smile, as I too fell to the ground. Chuck always claimed to be dangerously photosensitive, yet he refused to speak to a medical doctor. He managed to convince Father to allow him a medical accessory during training, but Autumn and I both know full well he does it to look cool for his own vanity. She thought he only got away with this because Father had given up on him as a prospect entirely, which checks out considering his general underperformance. Damaging this stupid accessory was funny to me, as was the idea that the child Charles Aurum named after himself is his greatest disappointment. With Nick as the last one standing, victory was presumably his. I did not wake up until a couple of days later, so I cannot be sure of what transpired after the triple collapse. Over the next several years, our training only got worse. Eventually, a little over a year ago now, my training and Autumn's had come to an end. Writing that feels wrong, as so much has happened and changed in the last year, despite it being such a small window of time. Regrettably, my father had one last trial in store for us both. He had gathered everyone in the dining room, with Autumn and I blindfolded and seated at the table in the center. Servants, strangers, and our two brothers surrounded us in a cloak of noise and confusion until everyone suddenly went quiet all at once.
It has been an honor to train you both,
he emotionlessly claimed.
But now you're ready for true responsibility, serving the Indigalo Federation.
Since we were the eldest, this ceremony was the first of its kind. He had always made it somewhat clear that our training was a program to be graduated from with a grueling trial. So I came prepared. I learned every style of fighting, every weapon, and every move perfectly. My preference had always been the use of 2 longswords at once, an unpopular yet effective means for combat that only someone of my strength and genetic predisposition could handle. At that time, and with those weapons, there was no opponent, other than possibly a sorcerer, capable of besting me in real combat. This is not a statement of hubris. It is something that I have since proven. There exists no fair fight in which I lose.
Knights, remove your blindfolds and take note of what lies in front of you,
he ordered. We both did as commanded, only to find a sharp and finely made Indigalo dagger on the table in front of us, like an unpleasant entree. The refined blue alloy shone beautifully in the candlelight, but the weapon would not remain so clean. Sitting across from us were 2 bloodied men in jumpsuits. One was missing an ear, the other an eye, but both were gagged and weak. The objective was immediately apparent.
Kill the prisoners and you'll be granted ranks within the Indigalo Federation,
he explained.
Refuse, and I will kill you both, and them. Good luck.
This idea on its own did not frighten me much. What truly scared me was the experience of turning to see Nicholas nodding encouragingly toward me. He had clearly run through the logistics so quickly as to determine that my best option was to do as I was instructed. Killing made theoretical sense, as the prisoners would surely be dead either way. And there is a possibility that my continued existence could lend itself to meaningful change through my newfound authority. Still, I would be a murderer. I knew Nick was right, but it just sickened me to see this complacent 12-year-old boy who had, of his own judgment, determined that murder was the right choice. I did not care if it was right. I just did not want to hear it from him, of all people. He was supposed to be the good one. I suppose innocence never lasts long in a place like this.
They are human,
I mumbled, pretending as though that made any difference to me morally, desperate for a way out.
Correct,
answered my father calmly.
But sometimes you will have to kill humans, whether they be Galala-rich thieves, sorcerers, or Pharaonite smugglers. This is the tragic price of peace. You know this, Zed.
Not all of our enemies get to be dirty Filibrano brutes.
Snorted Autumn as she rose from her chair. There was no way out of this trial, and any further resistance would only make things worse. After an awkward length of deliberation, I procured a conclusion. It was right to kill this man, despite not knowing his crime, or him personally. As long as I vowed to do right by him and make Hanyam a better place, with the life his death would grant me. By the time I had worked it all out, Autumn was already atop the table, holding her prisoner's decapitated head by a clump of hair. Blood dribbled down from the remains of the poor man's throat, and a pained expression permanently clung to his gagged face. Everyone, even Nick, was cheering for her. She was disgustingly proud, as always. Acting as though I had simply been waiting my turn and allowing her to have the moment to herself, I rose from my chair after a polite clap and smile. I remember how I could see myself reflected in his eyes. My rugged face was emotionless as the fake smile faded quickly. The blonde mass atop my head looked properly tamed. Outwardly, I must have appeared like a true professional. On the other hand, his expression was full of fear, as if he could beg me for mercy with only his facial muscles. Unluckily for him, I am not a man to go back on anything. I identified the carotid artery. I raised the dagger. I hesitated for a moment, but then I took a deep breath. Mechanically, it was easy. I lowered the dagger. I heard clapping and cheering. I forced a bow and a smile. Father looked right at me with a smile as fake as my own. He knew it was hard for me. I bet he did not even want to give me this win. But he knew I had technically earned it. Luckily for him, we would be moved out of the castle and into separate Federation outposts the following week. Despite all the cheering, something told me my training was not truly over just yet.